Marsh, and so I'm very proud on behalf of NCECA to introduce him, who's giving our closing lecture today. Tony has taught, lectured, and exhibited his work extensively throughout Asia, United States, and Europe. He has been the educational driving force behind the ceramics program at Cal State University at Long Beach for over 20 years, mentoring multiple generations of superb artists. Tony has shown his work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Art and Design in New York, the LA County Museum, the Gardner Museum in Toronto, and other highly regarded art galleries and institutions all over the world. And in 2018, he, along with a few select others who are here, received the United States Arts Fellowship Award for $50,000, recognizing the most compelling artists working and living in the United States in all disciplines at every stage of their career, and we are honored to have Tony give our closing. Thank you so much. Please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I was really nervous in the lead up to this, but no, I'm not. Because failure has found me, and that's what we know, right? I feel like I'm in the studio now. My presentation crashed an hour ago, and I grew up playing baseball, and so I know about failure. I transitioned into working with clay. I know about failure. So this is going to be, I'm going to wing this a little bit, because what's in my brain and what's going to be on the screen might be two slightly different things. So bear with me on that, please. But anyway, I want to thank, in particular, Josh Green for thinking that I should be the person up here to do this, and also to Dory Nielsen for being so patient and kind, and the text here, too, really wonderful. And I also need to thank a few other people, some guides, that I've had and that I've talked to and that have helped me, John Gill, Bobby Silverman, Leslie Farron, Doug Jeck, people like that, helped me shape my ideas for what this talk might be. Now, we'll see what the talk is, right? So I'm here really, after so many years in the field. I've been teaching for over 30 years, making things for over 40. And so I want to share some of that, and ways in which the field's shaped me, and making has shaped me, and the things I've come to understand, and how I feel about education and making, and especially from a West Coast perspective where I am in Los Angeles, Southern California. I want to start with these two gentlemen, because that's kind of where I think, really important things started happening for me, and that is Tetsuzo Shimaoka and Shoji Hamada on the screen. And they were living national treasures. Neither, of course, is alive. They were living national treasures in Mashiko, the only potters to be named such there. And I had the good fortune to be there and study with Shimaoka in the 70s. And so I'm going to tell a few stories about that and the ways in which that experience shaped and prepared me. So I was an undergraduate at Cal State Long Beach, where I teach, and where I currently teach. And I went to a lecture by Shimaoka because his daughter was blowing glass at Long Beach State, and he came. And so at the end of the lecture, he said, very kind of abruptly, if anyone would like to come to Japan and work in my pottery, you can do that if you have the permission of the teacher here. And then he said, would anyone like to come? And this was all, this is an audience of students. And I had just graduated, and I had no debt. I had no clue about grad school, no idea about that. And so I thought, why not, And so I raised my hand and was hoping he'd call on me. And right behind me, my friend raised his hand just a second before me. And it was Greg Escalante, who went on to found Juxtapose magazine. And so Shimaoka went right over the top and called on him, and I thought he was, calling me. But he said to Greg, how long will you come and stay if you go to Japan? And Greg said, I'll stay for 3 months. Well, I immediately I put my hand up in the air, and I didn't even wait to be called on. I just said, I'll stay for 3 years. And it was like and then I distinctly remember putting my head in my hands and thinking, what have I just said out loud? What have I done? Why did I do that? And And so I went, and I felt like the fool that backed into a Christie's auction, scratched my head and bought a painting or something, just by. So anyway, I went from 78 to 81. It was really a brilliant, very, very difficult but brilliant experience for me. And Shimoka gave me a house to live in and a salary to support myself for 3 years as a worker in the pottery. So after I was there for a year and a half, I worked really hard. I was just strictly focused on being there, And I worked very hard. After a year and a half of being there, he came up to me outside one day and just said, listen, you can go home after 2 years. You don't have to stay for 3. You will have gotten what most foreigners come to Japan to get in 2 years. And he knew it was hard, and it was very hard for foreigners there. And but I said immediately, I just said, no, I don't want to do that, because I felt like everything was speeding past me like you're in a train, and everything's going by so fast you can't understand it. And it had to do with not speaking the language as well as I wanted to. And so I just said, no, I'm going to stay for 3. Thank you very much, And he liked that answer because he liked the clarity of it. And then he also liked that I was going to be there for another year and a half. And what it meant was he could give me more responsibility. And so that meant that I could make money for him, So it was good. So I liked the additional responsibility, and that I could contribute to this really beautifully. It was a well-oiled machine, Everyone knew what they were doing. So it was so amazing to be there. And then I got a raise, and life was great. And I think he liked my clarity on that. I had no hesitation. So I was there. It was about a month later. He came up to me and said, "Please come to my house to dinner tonight." And that unnerved me a little bit, But I did, and he said at dinner, he said, "Look, my apprentice is graduating. I won't have an assistant. I'd like you to come and sit on the wheel next to me and help me with my work for the rest of your time here, and also do the work of the pottery." And so I was a little bit overwhelmed by that, and I did it, and that was truly about the hardest year of my life, and just trying to understand how to help someone like that, and yet also being able to watch a potter like that work every day was really a brilliant thing. I felt like in some ways, and this is not blasphemy, but I felt like in some ways that, in ways that I appreciated, he was a better potter than Hamada. He wasn't as romantic and sentimental as Hamada. And don't get me wrong, I think Hamada is the greatest potter, and of that era in the Mingei movement for a lot of reasons. But there was something about Shimoka's work I really appreciated, its modernity and lack of sentimentality. So I did that, and he gave me a graduation exhibition in Tokyo at the Takumi Craft Gallery, and gave me time off to work, and gave me a whole chamber in his climbing kiln, and so I made about 600 pieces, I think, and had a show, and altogether those 3 years were a great clarifying experience in my life, and it helped me understand more about who I was as a person, and especially displaced from west to east, that's a really interesting thing to do. And also as a maker in particular. And so that kind of clarity helped me understand how to make decisions about my life moving forward, especially when I was coming back to the States, and I had to start making really interesting decisions about where and how I was going to make. This is a Unomi. I think most people might know that. It's a green tea cup that's handleless. And I just want to tell a little story about it because it was very important to me. And it was the shape that I first started making when I was there. And it was complicated because it was so simple. Simple shapes are sometimes hard to make. And I had a model for it. I had all the tools. I was learning to throw clockwise their way. And so things were hard. The clay's not the greatest. And I couldn't get it. I couldn't get the shape. I kept making the shape I wanted to see. And they gave me a model. And they were waiting for me to get it right so they could start using it. And I just had a hard time with it, And so eventually, the apprentice at the time, this was early in my stay there, sat down next to me and he said, "Look, take a look at this cup." He said that on this cup, the lip that's flared is the widest point in the breadth of the cup. And he said, that's because we have a phobia about spilling green tea on ourselves, because that green tea is hot, it's boiling water. And we're afraid of being scalded. And he said, we drink green tea 4 times a day sometimes. We serve green tea to people. And this is a general phobia that's out there. And this cup is designed so that if it slips in your hands, you have a last gasp chance to save yourself. He said, it's not true, but he said it plays subconsciously in the thinking of the user, and that the cup somehow alters the phobia and the psychology of the user. It influences that by its shape. And I was in my 20s, but I was dumbfounded by that. I thought that was remarkable. I thought I was just making a cup. But I was making something that had a delicate cultural agreement in it that was about influencing the psychology of the user, the shape. And that to me was profound. A mundane coffee cup doesn't have that kind of stuff encoded in it where I came from. So all of a sudden, I understood the cup, I could make it. And I also thought that I could make that cup for the rest of my life because it felt meaningful. It felt like a profound, meaningful engagement with the culture. And isn't that kind of all what we're looking for as makers? You don't want, especially potters, you don't want to just make stuff that no one cares about, no one uses, no one knows about. And so I think that was something that was important to me because I had to think about what I was going to do when I came home, And of course, things like that kind of created some doubt because I didn't know if I could find that kind of a meaningful engagement when I returned home as a potter in the States versus what I was experiencing there when I was really, you're connected to the culture when you're doing things like that. There's an immediacy there that's important. And I don't think comparing pottery culture in any country is a good idea when you're comparing it to Japanese, pottery culture. It's kind of Mecca in a way. It's another story here. And this was a show of 30 platters that were made by the workers in the pottery and decorated by Shimoka, their big Osara, And there's 30. It was in Osaka in a department store. And these exhibitions are 1 week long, not a month like we know. And the potter goes with them and comes back at the end of the week and deals with, all the fanfare of an exhibition. And then the exhibition's over. And when he came back, he only brought 2 platters with him. He sold 28. And in 1978, those platters were priced at $5,000. So if you do the math, in 2019, that's over $500,000 in gross sales. And that was just a blip on the needle for the kind of things we were making there. It almost came and went, not unnoticeable, but we were so deeply engaged in making so much work, and it was going all over the place. And Shimoka was very successful financially and otherwise. And that also started to become apparent that the culture had this wonderful, deep embrace and celebration and support for its potters. And it also raised the question in my mind, what's going to happen when I come back, And so these are all good questions, of course. Pottery, handmade pottery in Japan is, in most households, you can have a cogent conversation with people on the street, probably. It's really woven into the fabric of daily life in Japan. And so that means that if you're a potter, you're engaged in a social practice that's very meaningful and very important. And so, I had to ask myself, what happens when I come home? So I might have stood a better chance of being a potter had I not gone to Japan, in a way, So this is the workshop, and it's a beautiful space, and this is where we worked, and the first wheel was my wheel. And when I first got there, I would go in at night and work at the wheel just because I loved doing that. And after hours, during this day, I worked for the pottery. I made pottery shapes and such. And whatever they were doing, we did it. So I would go in and essentially kind of play, get a certain amount of clay, put it on the wheel, mess around. And Shimoka saw the light on one night, so he came over. He just lived right across the way. And he opened the door, came in, said hi, and stood there and watched me for a while. And it was kind of unnerving, And he finally just said, "Tony, what are you making?" And I looked up at him, and I was kind of shocked that he asked me, because I'd never been asked what I was making halfway through the making of it. I just finished my undergraduate degree. And I said, "I don't know." And he just looked at me and said, "Well, if you don't know what you're making, how can you make it?" And he walked out. and if I was going to ask him that question when he was making, he would know. He'd know exactly what he's making. And I was thinking, well, as soon as I'm done making it, I'll know what I'm making. But I'm not going to know before I start, So it really was just kind of pointing to the difference in the way I was thinking and where I came from and the way he was thinking, the way potters think and the way people who are not potters think. And so all these things were adding up, to me. And I felt like Shimoka's work was really important. We knew it then. It became even more important in Japan and internationally. And it's important because it's a filter and it's a distillation. That's what good pottery is. It's encoded, with the beliefs and the dreams of its cultural place and time. And of course, he was making work with clay out of his backyard too, And so I had to think about that. I really admired him. He was a heroic kind of a presence in my life. And so when I was ready to leave at the end of 3 years, I knew that I wanted to be like him, because I admired him deeply. But I didn't want to make his work, and I didn't want to make Japanese ceramics. And that was clear to me, and thankfully. Because as I said, that process of being in Japan for 3 years and having all these things come at me and having to deal with them was a clarifying 3 years. And so I went home very clear about the fact that I wanted to be like him, and I wanted my work to be important and encoded with the beliefs and the dreams of my cultural place and time. And so I did, but I didn't want to be a Japanese folk potter. So this is a setup, I've been setting this up for younger people and people in the audience that are in the process of trying to understand who they are as makers, And I think you have to go through that clarification process, because what you're doing is you're establishing kind of a bedrock foundation that hopefully with increasing clarity, you're going to build the house of your work on. And so how does a young person become the maker they're supposed to become? First of all, it's a lot of hard work and continuity. And those 3 years in Japan for me, asked a lot of important questions, and I had to deliver answers. And so young makers need to do the same. They need to bring as much clarity as they can to bear on the process of learning and, know thyself. Here's one of our more interesting problems. We kind of deal with this as a field. And we work side by side in university programs and studios around the country. And some people make teacups, and some people make figurative art. Some people make sloppy craft, phenomenological experiments that run the equipment. And some people make props for performative installation, and more. It's an expanded field. And the list of things we're able to do is really great. And even more so, this is all done in the same studio, using the same materials, taught by the same teachers, using the same equipment, side by side. So it's confusing. These things have different histories, different maker strategies, different discussions that need to revolve around them, different aims and desired outcomes, for each of these assorted practice. So it can be really wonderful. I like that kind of creative chaos in the studio. I think that people can feed off that, but it can be confusing, and I think especially in that group, the people that are disadvantaged are the potters, the true potters, the people that want to, be potters. Just an observation over the years. So people need to define territories of interest and enter the discourse of their choice, or their work leads them there. It's not a choice, that's it's a calling. And I don't know what's more important than that. You also need to seek out kindred spirits, and form, and this is going to be a refrain, but you need to form, and I'm going to say something like fierce community. I think that the older I get, the more I understand the value of that. I don't know that I understood it even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but I think that it is paramount in importance and can't be oversold. The idea that You're not by yourself. You need to find people that believe what you believe and support what you support, and you support each other and take care of business that way. So what I'm going to do next is kind of read you this list. And for a frame of reference, when I say crafter or potter, I'm talking about people that are making pottery for daily use. I'm not talking about the pot as an object, or all the other things that pottery does, or as a subject. I'm talking about it as an object for daily use and functional ceramics, utilitarian ceramics, okay? So this list is a little bit polemic, just to be clear, and it discusses the idea about the difference between, and I'm showing you Shimoka's stuff still, I'm just kind of rambling, talking as you look at images. They're not really connected, so don't think they are necessarily. This is for polemics, it's for clarity, and so, of course, I'm going to try to clarify that later, but this is so you get to, in your own mind, think, where am I in all this? Where do I reside? Where do I come down? How do I land? What do I believe? What don't I believe? Who am I? So an artist might not know what she or he is about to make. Potters need and want to know what they're going to make. That was Shimoka's question. What the heck are you making? There's a certain level of anxiety in making art while dealing with the new or the unknown, and that can be addictive. There's a certain kind of relief that potters sometimes feel that comes with tasking an entire day or week to repetitive skill-based making, and that can be addictive. Art is largely a cultural critique. Craft, pottery, is a cultural affirmation. Crafters protect and honor tradition. Artists want to send it to the dustbin. Art creates doubt. Craft reassures. Good craft reassures. Crafters, potters serve culture. Artists serve their own artistic ideas. Starting to get the idea? Where do you land in all this, and who are you as a maker? Are you engaged in a practice that's attempting to move the field forward, or are you engaged in a practice that's attempting to live up to and maintain historically high standards? In art, sometimes the subject is beauty, but that's complicated because art doesn't like that topic. In craft, more often the object, they don't like it because it's messy. It's really hard to define, and it's too subjective. In craft, more often, the object might engage notions of beauty and pottery, and that's not tricky at all. Artists are frequently more focused on the meaning of what it is they're making. Crafters are frequently more focused on how it's made, what it's made of, how well it's made, and how well it's made rather than what it might mean. Some of the best art grows out of an informed discussion or disagreement with the history of its type. Some of the best craft and pottery is a celebration of all the great traditions that inform it and grows out of an agreement with what came before. A good crafter will pack his or her parachute with an inspection list, and that's the parachute they're going to use the next day in a jump. And they need to pay attention to that, and you got to get it right because it's about self-preservation. An artist will just jump out of a plane and say, uh-oh, better make a chute before I hit the ground, It's more about risk. In your practice, are you risk tolerant or are you risk averse? Which do you more believe? Ceramics punishes risk takers with failure. Ceramics rewards risk takers with failure. Ceramics punishes people that want to come up and speak and blow up their PowerPoint. The ceramics community appreciates the expression of skill with the material. The fine arts community appreciates ideas. So that's a list, and that's a very polemic list in a way, just for clarity. But it's important to understand the distinctions between these things, as well as the similarities, the crossover territories, where hybridization is taking place in the fields of art, design, and craft. And then where you land in all this, it requires rigor, and that's another community and rigor, I think, are my refrains today. And I hope that school and the experiences that you engage in and out of school are great clarifying experiences for you in terms of who you are, and who are you? That's the question. To my friends who are potters, and don't get me wrong, I love potters, I'm just not one, you know. I understand potters, I understand pottery, and I really love it, but I'm just not a potter in my spirit, you know. When I was young, pottery was an anti-industrial, romantic escape that so many flocked to, and I'm talking about the 60s and the 70s, you know. So many flocked to it as a counterculture way of life, completely unprepared. Those were called hippies. I think potters today need to be prepared. They need to have a good business model or understand business well somehow. They're still romantic, however. The hand still matters. They better have fortitude, though, and most importantly, I think they need to be culturally engaged so they can do what potters have done since the beginning of civilized time. And that's to be community builders in the biggest way. If you do the research, you know your history, you'll understand that they're some of the biggest community builders that culture has known, and for lots of really interesting reasons. And they've also been some of the most entrepreneurial folks on the planet, and you need to remember that and know that. And potters today need to be bold and find ways in which the community that they serve will find them valuable, useful, and necessary. Whether that's by identifying local problems, that potters have always done, and inventing ceramic solutions, or by using the vehicle of pottery to insist on provoking thought, and hopefully some change, maybe. Check the work of Erin Toole, Julia Galloway, especially her latest work, and the practice of Ayumi Horie, and many, many others. That's pottery as meaningful social engagement, and that is a path forward, and a very interesting one. And once again, build an ecosystem of support community around you. It might be one of the more important things that you do. Okay, so I also, kind of the second half of this, and this is where it really goes off everything goes off the map here, but I want to talk about my history as a teacher, you know, and what's gone on the West Coast at Cal State Long Beach and some of the things we've done, and how I've grown to understand where we are as a field. And this is one of our kiln yards. We're lucky the weather's good, we can work outdoors, so we got a lot of kilns outside. And I've been there for over 30 years now, and I've been inviting artists with increasing frequency since the mid-1980s, in fact, to come and work along with students and faculty in no-cost residencies for up to 2 years. In about the past 10 years, I've favored inviting painters and sculptors with mature artistic vision who were trained in other mediums but wanted to work with clay. There's a collective wisdom in our building, just because we've been through so much with all kinds of different makers, and there's just so much activity there all the time. But that collective wisdom is wonderful, and we all kind of own it, and so that anybody in the building who's there can make use of it and fabricating and finishing their work, no matter how esoteric that work is. We'll give it a good shot. And I do encourage artists to be ambitious, sometimes I regret it, and to take advantage of our special equipment and our facilities and what we know. And I encourage them to make work that they couldn't or otherwise wouldn't make if they weren't there. And when someone presents me with a crazy idea, I've taken no out of my vocabulary. I just don't say no. And the overly dogmatic crafter in me wants to say no. And that can't be done. That's a bad idea, you know. But instinctively, I don't know. And we just try to find a way around that. And I tell them, you know, if you don't mind a little failure along the way, you know, we may find a way to get this done, you know. So that's kind of the approach I've taken in working with lots of different people. In 2017, we institutionalized what you see up there, the CCC, the Center for Contemporary Ceramics, on campus after many years of running it kind of underground, which I preferred, to be honest with you. And the goal is simple. Identify artists whom we think can assist in growing, who we think we can assist in growing the ambition and the outcome of their work. And conversely, those whom we feel will model valuable artistic behavior in our studios to the students. It's kind of organic. So the artist benefit, it's not structured, it's not academically structured, you know. So artists benefit. They get to come use great equipment for free. They engage other artists there, which is of benefit many times. Helps them build community and cross-pollination of ideas. And they also, it's really great for our students because our students work side by side with these artists and sometimes are hired by them to help them create bodies of work that are for exhibition, and that's all over the world, you know. So it's win-win-win. I think the field also benefits because, especially in Southern California, we want to bump the needle and make ceramic art more present and more viable and more exciting. So I'm going to be showing slides, images of work of fairly recent artists because I didn't have an iPhone on me 25 years ago. And now I walk around just popping pictures all the time. It's great. But a lot of times, I mean, so much stuff happened there. So many people have been through over the years. And unfortunately, it wasn't really documented well, if at all. So everything you see is mostly relatively fresh, you know. But there's a few older images I was able to find. But again, I'm just going to be talking through my ideas, however scrambled they are now, and showing images that I'm not going to be addressing per se, but they're images of artists who have worked there, and the name is up, and sometimes the gallery affiliation, or places they've made work for exhibition. And so, you know, you'll be looking and listening to different things, really. So there's things you notice, you know, when you work with a lot of artists. The most successful artists I know are the hardest working people I know, period. And some of the most notable art being made today using clay is recognized by those outside of our community is being made by artists who are not trained in the field, you know, whether we like that or not. On the whole, these folks are a different class of personality type than I'm accustomed to being around in ceramics. We're so communal. And we've been largely conditioned by our respectful crafts culture because we've got to be in the building together, right? The equipment's there. You go to the equipment. Sculptors, painters, photographers they don't have to be together, and they don't even want to be together. But we do. So we've got a respectful crafts culture, and these artists come in there, and they're less communal, and they're really disruptors, you know. So that sometimes is rough for us, you know, but I think it's interesting. And they're generally very open. They're very curious about what they're doing. They have a much higher tolerance for risk and failure. Their thinking about making was never shaped by the do's and don'ts of craft dogma, you know, and so that you know, frequently accompanies our education in ceramics. And so I think that their influence in our studio is an important and a necessary thing, and it's healthy. And so that's why it's been there. I feel like the faculty, certainly know how to present ceramics, but to offer the flip side of how other people might think about things, just so we have a really diverse discussion in the studio. Having these people there is very, very valuable to us. I think the thing that's really interesting about them, too, is that they don't mess around, you know. Their priorities are set to favor optimal studio conditions, and they don't care about many other things, and they don't play, you know. And to me, the thing that's really beautiful is that they're regularly willing to enter into absurd artistic schemes without first knowing that they're going to be successful, and also without knowing that there's going to be any reward for it whatsoever. And I think that's really important too, you know. And these folks are human though, you know, they suffer in varying degrees from the fear of failure, the fear of success that we all do. But I've noticed that they typically move forward anyway. It doesn't really matter. It's like they have no choice. The fire behind them is bigger than the fire in front of them, you know. And it boils down to this, really, as I've seen it over the years. Those that want to make, and those that don't, find something better to do. And once again, the thing that keeps coming back to me that's very important, that's why I keep saying it, is they build and maintain strong connectivity to a supportive arts ecosystem, especially these people outside the studio. And that serves them well. They open their arms to the universe. I don't know how to say it any other way. It sounds a little new age, you know, but they do. They just open their arms to the universe and they say yes a great deal more than they say no. And they answer their phone. It's more important than you think. So ceramics punishes risk takers, but many of these artists are not risk averse. So they're not drawn back into coloring between the lines when things fail, as they inevitably do in ceramics. And that is also an interesting lesson for our students. They're actually excited by it. There's a lot of them that are excited by failure. They see something go wrong, and it's just a whole new raft of opportunities for them. They're energized and excited by it, not demoralized that all their work's been ruined. So, a question, do you want to be relevant? Are you interested in being relevant? Okay, I heard you all answer. So then the question is, what artistic or craft discussion do you want to be part of? And that's in your work. What discourse might you ultimately help shape with your work and your ideas? And conversely, by the way, that discourse shapes you too. And so it's a rich environment to be in. But you need to eventually boil it down to that if you want to be relevant. I can speak to what I've seen happen on the West Coast in Los Angeles in the time I've been there, and I think it's kind of extraordinary. There used to be a natural gallery home for most ceramic art, and if you were interested in presenting your work in ceramics, it generally had to happen there. There were medium-specific galleries that championed ceramic art, and with a few exceptions now, most everywhere, those galleries are disappearing, unfortunately. The change has been a long time in coming, but seriously underway for about the past 10 years and accelerated in about the past 5, in my opinion. Currently, one would be hard-pressed to find a contemporary fine art gallery in Los Angeles, perhaps New York as well, that does not exhibit art made of clay and carry the work of several artists who do. I still think there's a quota on us. I don't see galleries counting painters. How many painters are we carrying? We can only have 3 clay people. It's a growing thing, and actually, I'm very excited by it. If it's any barometer, the Gagosian Gallery, which you may have heard of or not, a multinational, corporate, institutional conglomeration, which operates 15 galleries around the world, has an operating budget of $1 billion every year, carries maybe 5, which I think is obscene, by the way, I just want to add that. But it carries 5, maybe 6 artists who use art, who use clay to make art. This recalibration is underway. I don't think that it's a fad or a trend that's going to go into reverse and take us back to where we were not that long ago. Art made of clay is showing up with frequency at the Whitney Biennale, the Venice Biennale, and other blue-chip arts events around the globe like never before. It's kind of shocking to me after watching it for so long. It's one of the most powerful developments to occur in my adult lifetime in the field, is this, if any of you wishes to exhibit your art made of clay in Southern California, I speak about that because I know it, or even perhaps New York, and hopefully increasingly anywhere, you will now, this is the thing, you'll now need to compete with other artists to do that. That's a big deal. Yeah. Not just other folks who are working with clay. And if you want space and attention, that's the way it is. I'm not sure if our schools are prepared to help students understand how to do that yet, but there's a shift in that too. I think it's one of the most exciting developments in the evolution of contemporary American ceramics, in my opinion, and it will present before unattainable opportunities to many more people. And those people, though, you've got to be ready for that. And I do think it could change the shape and the perception and the orientation of what we know about ceramics in the future. However, here's the thing. It's not going to be available to everybody, unfortunately. It's really, because it's the same thing is true for painters and sculptors, you don't, just because you make it doesn't mean you get to show it, It's going to require, I think, a different level of rigor, both in and outside the studio. That's what it's going to require. And there's a strain of anti-intellectual persistence in our field that are not going to benefit very many people, unless, of course, that becomes some kind of defensible artistic strategy, I think it's really popular. It's easy to lay this anti-intellectualism at the doorstep of Pete Volkus. And yes, he deserves a heap of it, I think, because of the way he behaved, you know. But I've always felt like, you know, while I don't disagree with that entirely, I felt like he was kind of more symptomatic than he was causal. And I feel this way also, that collectively, we're a nation of very sweet people. And I'm grateful for that, actually. And working with clay by nature offers us a primary, sensual, physically challenging, kinesthetic experience with a material that records action and emotional primacy and offers experiential learning like no other material, art-making material. Painting, for instance, is mostly cerebral. It exists in the mind. It's an illusion, and it's from the wrist on. It's not that physical unless you're Jackson Pollock or something. So painting tends to attract people who are probably more interested in a more highly intellectualized art-making experience. And I'm not sure that clay attracts the personality types that are that interested in a deeply intellectual engagement. It does some, for sure, of course. You know, I'm not saying we're not smart. You know, I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to understand these things as I've watched them, the kinds of people that come through my classroom year after year after year, and that I work with in the arts year after year, and understand why they're attracted to that material, and I think that's part of it. I think plus we've got deep roots in craft culture, you know, and that may also begin to explain our resistance to intellectualizing our experience in the way that other artists intellectualize their experience. So I think those that harness all that and bring a higher degree of intellectual rigor to their practice are much more likely to succeed in the art world that's opening its doors to clay. And so let me be clear about that. What I'm not saying is I'm not saying that the intellectual part has got to come first. I think that what you need to do, if that's not the case for you, is make a lot of work, and then there's going to be a certain amount of evidence that is what your work is about, and you need to understand how to divine into that and be able to discuss it and identify it and kind of know where your work lands on the spectrum of all things of its type that have been made, so that you have a sense about what it is and what its place is in the history of its type, so that you can talk about it intelligently and deal with it and frame it, you know. And I think that's what art it requires, you know. Be careful what you wish for. You know, I talk to Steve Lee about this kind of stuff all the time, and he's like, yeah, you really want to hang out with those people? You know? Be careful what you wish for. Something that's also really important that I'm talking about here is that when you write or speak about your art, think about how you assign language to your work. Words really matter in that world. And as much as possible, each maker should try to control the narrative, and certainly one has opportunities to do that more so now than ever with kind of the social media platforms that are out there waiting for you to use. The word descaling comes up all the time. Are we tired of that word yet? Sometimes I get tired of it, but I'm just kind of interested in all this stuff. So the deal is, when the issues of high skill set craft are generally removed from the discussion by low skill set work, it kind of takes part of the discussion away when you're talking about this sloppy craft or de-skilled work, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so you're not talking about the craft or how it was made, because that's not amazing. And really all that's left is to talk about artistic ideas or the expression of ideas or something like that. You really only have an art discussion left, so therefore it's art. I think it's a brilliant strategy. You're not, the conversation's not derailed by craft in a way. That doesn't make it good art, by the way. So, but I think that's kind of what's happened with descaling and the way it's been accepted, and generally by the art world. One of the problems at times with high skill set craft is that skill becomes the content, and it renders the subject matter as less relevant, and whatever the subject matter might have been, and simply a foil for the exercising of virtuoso skills. And the arts community is not as interested in somebody's virtuoso skill set. They're interested in ideas. They already assume that artists are skilled. they're not concerned with that. So it's the value and the relevancy of ideas and artistic expression. That's where the discussion is with them. We're impressed by that. We're impressed by high skill set craft because we know how hard it is to control this material, and we want to celebrate all those victories when we see them. But the contemporary fine art world is not always so interested in that. I want to say a few things about technology, and because we've watched this tremendous revolution in our world in general, and it's also in art and in ceramics. And I think I saw Garrett Grimm here. Is Garrett here somewhere? There she is, yeah. So technology is interesting, and I think there's a lot of money in schools available for technology. It's easy money, and there's a lot of interest in it because kids are growing up with a phone in their hand, or a computer in their hand. And I've kept an open mind about it. I'm 65 now, or I will be this year. So I'm not always as in sync as everybody, but I've kept an open mind about the interface of technology and hands-off creating in the studio, because I think the day will arrive. I'm not sure it's here yet, and maybe I don't follow closely enough, but I'm sure the day is going to arrive when a maker will make something, make work, and it's going to force the field to stop, turn their head, and pay attention. And when that thing's been fabricated by a programmed piece of high-tech equipment. I think it's difficult. There's so much tedium, when you've got to program something and just watch it work. It's amazing in a way, but there's tedium there, and it's difficult. And it's hard, I think, for that subset to compete with the primacy and the intimacy and the excitement of putting an unruly material in the hands of an idiosyncratic maker. That's exciting. So hopefully the person who's going to change everything has already been born and working on it. And perhaps as this all shakes out, it's an orientation in ceramics that's going to tilt more naturally towards design. And by the way, I do not take Del Harrow lightly. I think he's very important and very kind of wonderful man and a wonderful maker too. I've always felt that raku never really rose above the status of kind of an amazing party trick. And I hope the future, sorry if you guys love raku, anyone out there. I hope that the future is not going to hold the same fate for digitally programmable fabrication in clay. Amazing party trick status. I hope it's better than that. I want to talk about power and influence. It's really an interesting shift there. And it's not that long ago. It was a relatively small group of experts, gallerists, magazine and book publishers, collectors, and a small handful of writers who largely decided what the top of the field looked like. Pretty amazing. They got to say who and what was exhibited, which images were delivered to the public in books, magazine, advertisements, posters, exhibition, invitations, catalogs, and the like. And the message was largely controlled by them. And to some degree, this influenced which works were institutionally acquired, and also which works became iconic, in our field. Collectively, these folks had a lot to do with shaping the canon. There's no evil conspiracy there, and Garth doesn't help dressing like that, but that's just the way that it worked, I really mean it. There's no conspiracy, there's nothing evil about it. A lot of people didn't like the way it went, but that's the way that's the way it always is. And that's just the way it worked. Everything had to filter up through a select group of tastemakers. And outside of their presentation back to us, it was extremely hard to know what was going on broadly in the field unless you traveled constantly with your eyes open all the time. And I say thank God for these people because they cared, Nobody was getting wealthy on it. It was largely passion-driven. And collectively, they kind of put us on the map. But that model for us wasn't going to hold. A few more makers here. Megan Smythe, I don't know if Megan's here. And I think now, more than they're accustomed, some of these folks are fighting for oxygen, like we all are. And I don't think that's unhealthy at all. I think it's a good thing. Social media platforms have been a great democratizing force, in my opinion. Walls are crumbling. Silos, the walls are crumbling. Ceramic arts culture is being built more horizontally than vertically. And things don't filter up in the same way that they used to. I think Instagram is one of the keys to this great leveler of influence, and our field is increasingly decentralized and becoming horizontal. It's kind of a mirror to the world we live in a way, of course. The new landscape we find ourselves in includes pop-up storefront exhibits, laptop publishable capability, online virtual galleries, and constantly new vehicles for commerce, private, non-profit flex spaces waiting for creative proposals, and self-appointed social media experts who will show you the way, you know. There's artist-run projects, and of course, every gallery worth salt now is working with artists who use clay. And it's quite a menu and a smorgasbord compared to 20 years ago, even. And the hybridization of all these things might make one dizzy, you know, or excited, you know. And how can I say this? If you can't find opportunity in all this, you're probably being too passive, say it kindly. You're being too passive. You need to wake up if you think there's not enough opportunity out there. I'm not sure how ceramic magazines, a staple in the field not that long ago, are coping. How can an image in a monthly magazine compete with the immediacy of a minute-to-minute stream of the latest images from around the world that's custom tailored on a daily basis by the viewer's interests and whims? And not to mention, you can keep the damn thing in your pocket and check it 100 times a day if you want. How do they compete with that? And further, those feeds are being filled in open competition for attention with the wisdom or the nonsense of the anonymous, the unknown, the known, and the social media influencers, of course. The whole thing's genius, really. And I think everybody should be on it. And guess what? It's free. I mean, it's not really free. Yeah, I think you pay a big price for it, but not money. So here's the thing. You know, if you're interested in a large number of followers, there's ways to accomplish that. There's algorithms you can follow, and there's things you can do. If you're interested in quality followers, I think you need to be rigorous with your feed. And basically what you need to do is enlighten people, and then interesting people will be attracted to that. Perhaps the magazines will need to do what Instagram doesn't do well, and that's create context, historical and otherwise. Kim Dickey was a resident with us, and a long time ago when we didn't have cameras around, but I found this image, and I hope it's the right, I hope it's of the right epoch. I think it is. So history, you know, my fear is that the importance of history is slipping, and that's reinforced by the way that Instagram works in offering viewers a continual stream of the new and the exciting. It's what America is addicted to and in love with, the new, you know. And what comes into your feed moment to moment is what matters. What's downstream is washed out to the ocean, to the cosmos, and it's done and of little relevance. The back feed in anybody's Instagram account is almost hardly ever looked at. Instagram's My Story and Snapchat celebrate the erasure of digital history. And I think young folks think that digital history is problematic. I mean, a lot of people are starting to think it's problematic. But, and so I worry about history and the relevance of history and things. Why is that worth mentioning to me? Because as a maker, I think to truly enter any meaningful discourse with rigor, one absolutely needs to be at least aware of the deep and more recent histories of the artistic territory that you're mining, and that's just for starters. You need to know what you agree and disagree with so that you can enter into meaningful conversations or arguments with those histories through your work. Your work's the argument, right? Your work's the proposition, the agreement, the disagreement, or the argument. And by the way, you don't just take a class in this at school and then you get it. Building and breaking arguments and agreements and learning about history in your practice as it relates to your work is a serious lifetime's work. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of rigor. A word of warning about Instagram. I think the galleries used to control the image and the message on behalf of artists in measured and strategic ways. They're pros at it. It's their business. Now an artist can become a 24/7, 365, uncensored, self-promotional machine. And the old school in me says, don't allow your work to become an overexposed prop for your Instagram feed. That is then the tail wagging the dog. But the audience isn't small anymore or fixed like it used to be. It keeps expanding. That's what Instagram allows you. So maybe the jury's out on that. Maybe I'm wrong. Importantly, again, Instagram offers a sense of community, support, recognition, perhaps celebrity, and potentially the benefits of commerce. And really, all of the trappings of the external reward system that artists need. I don't think it's just me, but maybe more importantly, you need the internal rewards of discovery that being curious and creative offer. I think that's the lifeline, the lifeblood, and the source of energy and renewal as a maker, and you need that. So you need to have both. How about that? I like it. Are we back? Yeah. I was going to get out here and just belt it out, you know. Oh, man. So, where was I? It's really about this balance between the internal needs of a maker and the external needs of a maker. You got to have both, you know, and you got to keep them in equilibrium. It's a delicate ecosystem, and it's easy to forget one or the other, or move or rush to one or the other, rush to all the external rewards that Instagram offers, as opposed to remembering that you need to nourish the internal and keep that in balance. That's where your lifeblood is, right? That's how you get the best outcomes in your practice. Teaching. I'm going to say a few things about teaching as this all winds down, you know, and thank you all. To teachers out there who have the responsibility of building the cosmology of an educational program, no matter how good the facility, how deep and comprehensive the curriculum, how shiny everything is, it's still all about people. It's people to people. That's what matters. So build a culture where in some fashion everybody teaches, everybody learns. Understand that the demographics of many university programs are changing faster than the turnover in faculty, and it's imperative that the needs of current and future generations of students are understood and met like they always have been. About 4 or 5 semesters ago, I had a class, and when I called roll for the first day, I checked it before we started class. I had students from 9 different countries in one 24-student class. And that's the new normal for us, you know, at Cal State Long Beach State College. And I think it's a beautiful thing. But, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's where it's going. And those needs need to be met. They really do. We need to work harder than ever to open doors and assist those that need help, and we need to plug gaps in the academic model. I'm not a true believer in all academics. I don't think that will prepare people for what they're going to face when they're done. You need to have all kinds of programming. That's why the CCC exists. That's why over the last 25 years we've sent 300 students abroad to study, not in study abroad, but to just travel on their own, a non-academic experience. The university doesn't let us do it anymore. It's too risky to do that, just to send people out in the world, you know, and pay for it, because then we're liable. But we have so many students that are first generation to college, and a lot of them have never been on an airplane, you know, my God, never been out of the country, never been out of California, and Americans more than ever, I think, need to get off the rock and see how other people think and live and dream, you know. So I think those kind of things where you've got the energy to do it, they need to be built into an education, so you're really preparing people as best you can. You give them more than they bargained for. And honestly, you know, for me, it was never hard to raise money for people like that. To stand up and talk about that kind of thing is great, and people love it and want to help, actually. And what they don't need are more abstract academics in their program. They need real-life experiences like that, and like working with artists. So, in my opinion, educators are not just hired to show up and teach a subject. I could care less about just teaching a subject, you know. And then issue degrees in a Halloween costume. Oops, am I being too harsh? I'm a career teacher, you know, but that's the way I feel. They need to use the institution to build a model for education that helps students develop talent, their natural talent, and prepare them for what they're going to be faced with when they leave, finish their formal education, and their real one begins, you know. Yeah. On my campus, too many teachers wear their prefix titles as badges of power: professor, doctor, blah, blah, blah. I think, for me, it's vastly more interesting and powerful, actually, and constructive to be influential than it is to be powerful, than just to simply acquire power, accumulate power. But the problem with that is the people that seek power on campuses anyway, I'm just going to leave it at on my campus is what I've seen over the years. What they do is they act when everybody's looking, you know. And I think people that want to be influential are always acting, especially when people aren't looking, and doing things that need to be done to help people and influence the lives of students. And I think I've only ever had one preeminent goal in mind, and I encourage everyone to think some of the same thoughts, and that is to use the full bearing of the institution to offer students more than they paid for, and simply stated, you want to change lives. That's really what it's all about. So, I've put a lot on the table. You guys are going to have to sort through all that stuff. My last words, open your arms to the universe. Answer your phones. Don't drink too much of anybody's Kool-Aid out there. Build precious, powerful communities, and bring more rigor to whatever you do. And safe travels, and thank you.